Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me at my work at my two websites, catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, we've got a very special guest for you today, and somebody that you're going to really want to probably maybe even take notes because he has so much wisdom to share with us today. And that is Dr. Loren Fishman. Dr. Loren Fishman is the director for the Manhattan Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation Center and author of many wonderful books. We interviewed him recently about his book, Yoga for Osteoporosis, and today we are talking with him about his recent book, Yoga for Weight Loss. So if you've been tearing your hair out, starving yourself, over exercising, and you just really want something that actually works and feels good, you're going to want to listen to Dr. Loren Fishman. Welcome, Dr. Loren Fishman.
Thank you.
So, and everybody, you can find out more about Dr. Loren Fishman and his wonderful work at his website, sciatica.org. So Dr. Loren Fishman, in years past, I would have clients come to see me and they would look at my bookshelf and they said, I have every diet book that you have on your shelf and then some. Why yoga for weight loss?
Well, there are the pluses and then there are the minuses of the other types of treatment. And let me go through the minuses first. I think that's a smart way to start. The minuses are there's almost no diet that people go on that doesn't work. And there's almost no diet that people go on that doesn't cease working after a while. People lose the weight they desire to lose. Then they slowly or abruptly go off of their special diet that they punish themselves by doing and feel very virtuous doing. And then within a year or two, or certainly 3 years, they've gained back all the weight they thought they had lost. When it comes to the medicines, it's basically the same story. A newer medicine, semaglutide, which is, Rybelsus, and what's it called? The medicines that have this in it, there's one called Wilus, and a third one called Olympus, not quite, something like Olympus, Olpentus, I think. Those three medicines all have semaglutide in them. And that's new because it does imitate a glucagon-like protein, something that will reduce the appetite centers in your brain. And it may be a little different. There was just a recent article in the New England Journal about it, saying that it really is very effective in losing weight. But after a couple of years, so far, so good. They haven't gained the weight back yet. But in every other case, and probably in this one too, the weight slowly creeps back. The only other one, and maybe we'll go into this in greater detail, I don't know, depends on the questions you ask, but there is a surgical procedure where they take this big organ inside you, the stomach, and they cut a couple of pieces and sew it up again as a smaller organ inside your stomach. The theory being, well, if it's a smaller container, it's going to contain less. Therefore, you'll eat less. Therefore, you will not put on weight. On the contrary, you'll eat so little that you will actually lose weight. And in some cases, this is successful. But in many cases, people's determination to eat what they want overcomes even the surgical revision. And they gain all the weight back that they had before with a smaller stomach that soon grows and grows and grows till it equals what it had been before. So those are all the negatives about all the alternatives to yoga. When it comes to yoga itself, the advantages are you lose weight reasonably painlessly. If you continue the yoga, you keep the weight off. You gain all kinds of things. You gain stature. You actually get a little bit taller because you don't slump. Your balance is better. Your range of motion is improved. Your strength is increased. Your coordination is enhanced. And your anxiety is lowered. In addition to which, you lose weight in a very natural way. You don't starve yourself until noon. You don't develop ketones in your body on purpose. And all the other things that do work, but they work only in a limited way because they're unpleasant and they have other consequences that you don't like. Yoga, on the contrary, has side effects that you do like. So that's why the reason, and yoga is effective in this. I mean, we'll go over the mechanisms. I think one of you better ask me a question about that. Well, how does yoga work? But the basic answer is yoga is an easy way to reduce your appetite. So you're not craving after something you can no longer eat because of your, Spartan refusal to do these things. You're not doing anything draconian. On the contrary, you're limiting your weight by limiting your volition. You're limiting how much you want to eat. Okay, that's enough, I think.
Okay, now Dr. Fishman, in my limited introduction of you, I neglected to share for my audience who you are a little bit more, in addition to being an author of these wonderful books and a director of a center in Manhattan. As I understand it, this point, you're 81 years old, correct?
That's correct.
Correct. And how many years have you been practicing and teaching yoga?
Oh, a little bit more than medicine. I've been doing yoga since it's about 45 years. It's getting close to 50 years. I hope so. More than half my life, I've done yoga every day. Let's say that.
That's so cool. And you're a medical doctor.
I'm a doctor. I spent years in India before I went to medical school. I studied with Mr. Iyengar for a year. I just rented a room in a hotel near where he taught and near where he lived. And every day for a year, I went and joined any classes that he gave. He was very generous, highly intelligent. And given that it was his second language that he taught himself, he was quite communicative in English. He didn't just smile and say something in Sanskrit. He explained what he was talking about. So, and he was, as I say, generous, intelligent, and ready to give.
Now, we appreciate here at the Natural Healing Show, we appreciate the scientific method and the rigors required to publish peer-reviewed articles in the medical journals. In addition to the peer-reviewed articles in medical journals, you have decades of experience as a yoga teacher and as a medical doctor. What is your observation, your personal observations, just from your watching about why you think yoga works better for losing weight than other traditional approaches that require over-exercising or starving or eliminating major food groups?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we'll probably maybe we'll get into this further, right? I guess I could start now. Yes, I've published I've published like more than 100 papers now, and I'm working on my 13th book. I'm doing a revision of yoga for osteoporosis. There's so much new research, and some of it informs the yoga that we do, which, by the way, does work. When it comes to weight loss, yoga works really in 3 different ways. The first way it works is using the vagus nerve, which innervates basically the top half of the stomach and the bottom half of the duodenum, first part of the small intestine. And here's the way the body works. If you eat enough to swell your stomach, make it get a little bit bigger, then pressure receptors in the organ, the stomach, send signals to the nucleus solitarius, part of the appetite center in your brain, and tone it down. Say, all right, you've eaten enough now. It's enough to eat, so stop, please. And that's a very effective feedback loop that we all have. Horses, by the way, don't have it. So if you give a horse enough to eat, he will eat, or she will eat they'll eat themselves to death. They will just keep eating until they die. They don't have this feedback loop, many of them, and we do. So we stop eating when we've had enough. Now, yoga, there are very simple yoga poses, back bends, stretches of your abdomen, really. That's how they work for weight loss. And they stimulate those stretch receptors in your stomach and in the first part of the duodenum, which reliably send those signals, faithfully send them back to the nucleus solitarius in your brain, and you're less hungry. So if you do these stretches, back bends, like the bridge, like the locust, do them 15, 20 minutes before you eat, you will already have inhibited your appetite. So you'll eat less. So that's one way that yoga works. Second way that yoga works is much more interesting than that. That's very straightforward. I should say about that method, they've tested it innumerable times on rats. Why do they test rats? Because rats don't vote. So you can do anything you like to them. And apart from a few animal rights groups, nobody seems to care. So what they found with the rats, they put a little balloon in their stomach. They pump up the balloon and they see what that does to the rat's appetite, stretching those stretch receptors in the stomach. Very simple and rather elegant experiment. And they find something very interesting. Those stretch receptors, stretched the same amount at noon and at midnight, have 4 times more power to reduce your eating at noon than they do at midnight. It's like the stretch receptors fall asleep too. And they don't inhibit your appetite late at night. So, little tip, those people that can't sleep and go down to the kitchen and open the refrigerator and they look up a little while later and they say, oh my God, the refrigerator's empty. It's all in me now. Why is that happening? It's happening because the stretch receptors are not doing their job nearly as well. They're only doing 25% of the suppression of appetite when your stomach gets full. So that's one of the reasons that they say late night eating is very bad for your weight. It's true. And that's why it's true. So because of that, I have developed it. It'll be a different webinar if we ever want to give it on yoga for insomnia. Because insomnia is a rather large cause of obesity. And they're both epidemic in the United States, at least, and in all of the industrialized world. So that's one way. Now let's get down to what I consider a much more interesting way, which is the mitochondria. What are the mitochondria? The mitochondria are these little power stations inside every cell in the body. What they really are, to me, it's very interesting. They are the remnants of bacteria that entered an animal cell at least 1 billion years ago. And instead of the animal cell eating it up, the bacterium in the animal cell got along beautifully. How do we know it's a bacteria? Well, it's its own DNA. The mitochondria has its own DNA, and its DNA is round, like a circle. And there's only one other category of being on Earth that has round DNA, and those are bacteria. And the bacteria have something in them called the Krebs cycle, which is the way we generate energy much more effectively and efficiently than we could without this little bacterium in there. But the bacterium all by itself doesn't do very well because it can't garner in all the proteins it needs for the peripheral processing of glucose and other things that it burns. If you lose weight, in fact, whether you're heavy or not, the only way you ever burn calories is by using the mitochondria. And it turns out that yoga and certain other things too, Tai Chi probably does this as well. Gentle or intermediate exercise does it. It stimulates your muscles to release a chemical called PGC1 alpha. Proactivator, never mind what it all stands for. It's a long name. It is the most effective stimulator of the mitochondria known to man today. There may be some others that we don't know about yet, that's for sure. But in the last 20 years, all we've come up with is PGC1 alpha, and it stimulates the mitochondria in 2 ways. First, it makes them multiply because they're bacteria. They can multiply, they can have more of them. So the cells can have more of them. So we have more power stations. Well, if a city has more power stations, guess what? It has more power. They can have more refrigerators, more air conditioners, everything else. And it also stimulates each of those mitochondria to become more active. Power stations working 24/7. So what do you need these little mitochondria for? Well, they do everything. Every muscle you move, every photon you record in your eye, every thought you have, every hormone you secrete, every bone molecule you build, all require energy. It's very different from cell to cell. The cells in the liver have like 2,000 mitochondria each. Nerve cells have only 2. Because they only do one little thing. They just, fire or fail to fire or not. So it varies very much, but the mitochondria are directly related to any burning of any fuel, any fat, any carbohydrate, any protein in your body that turns into energy is turned into it by mitochondria. Now, just to give you some idea of how effective they are, they must have entered some animal cell, as I say, 1 billion years ago. Today on Earth, there are almost no creatures that don't use mitochondria. There are a couple, they say, down at the sulfur springs in the deepest crevices of the Pacific Ocean that are completely different creatures, and they don't seem to use it. I've never read anything definitive about it, but it is said. Otherwise, every seleniterate, every cockroach, every anemone, every bird, every creature uses nothing but mitochondria because they've improved our usage of energy so much. But they don't just improve it, they are it. They're the only one now. They've beaten out any other creatures that don't have this. There are none of them anymore. So if you want to burn calories, it's the mitochondria. And if you want to increase the mitochondria, it's yoga.
So what you're saying from a physiological point of view is that yoga actually increases the mitochondria in our cells.
Much, very much, yes. More than the PGC1 alpha does it more than anything else. And yoga is one way to stimulate PGC1 alpha. That does not, you can't jump across and say, oh, then yoga is the most efficient way of stimulating the mitochondria. I can't go that far. I can go far enough to say yoga is a significant way to improve your mitochondrial function, both the number of mitochondria and their activity. Whether there's something else, hanging from the ceiling in an aqualung by your left buttock and singing Dixie in a completely different key, whether that will do better, I can't say. There may be something out there that does better.
Now that's really fascinating because we know that when you practice yoga, it actually gives you energy.
That is right. And this is exactly. Now, I want to mention something that is said. This is from a person who's actually a friend of mine, but it's wrong, in my opinion. And I have told him so. This is Bill Broad, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer for the New York Times. He wrote about the Iran nuclear development and won the Pulitzer Prize for it. I think he may have won a couple of others too. He writes books. He's a lovely guy, a wonderful guy, and a highly bright one who does yoga. Nevertheless, he says, how yoga lowers your metabolism. When you're doing yoga, your heart rate is lower and all that. So how can yoga lose you weight? He says, it's a rhetorical question, of course. And here's my answer to him. I say, Bill, what about going to college? You don't make a better living going to college. In fact, when you go to college, you have to pay them. So if you want to have money, don't go to college. But of course, after you go to college, you have a better job. And doing yoga often does lower your metabolism while you're doing yoga, like while you're going to college. But afterwards, you have more mitochondria that are more active, and you lose weight. So yeah, go ahead.
Now, you brought up a very interesting question because many so-called weight loss experts would go, it's just about the math. And so, for example, if you do high intensity HIIT training, high intensity interval training, you're going to burn more calories and therefore you're going to lose more weight. What is your response because to those arguments? Because when we do yoga, when we practice yoga, depending again on how big you are and how much you're exerting yourself, you're not going to be burning as many calories as you would if you were sprinting or in a spin class.
Yeah, well, okay, well, let's make another analogy. I mean, first, it's incontrovertible. If you burn more calories, you do lose weight. That's true. And there's no question that, pumping iron, a couple 100 pounds 10 times a day is going to burn more calories than not pumping iron or than going for a pleasant walk in the park. There's no question about that. That's true. But that's just one little old equation. I mean, suppose I were to say, I mean, it's like a bank account. If you spend more and you don't put in as much, guess what? You're going to have less money in the bank. And you'll have less calories. You don't put as many calories in and you take more calories out. Hey, does that work that way? Yeah. But I mean, it's like, let me make an analogy. It's like saying distance equals rate times time, right? If you travel 30 miles an hour for 2 hours, you go 60 miles. Who's going to deny that? But does that tell you who's going to win the Kentucky Derby? You say, oh, distance equal, oh, I know who's going to win. You can't tell from that. And calories in minus calories out gives you total calories. You can't deny it. But does it tell you whether you're going to lose weight or not? No. It can tell you over a very limited period of time where you're measuring your calories and so on. But I mean, for the Kentucky Derby, doesn't it matter? Did it rain last night? Did the jockey get a good night's sleep? What are they doing with the horses? There are a lot of other factors that go into who's going to win the Kentucky Derby. Although distance equals rate times time, you can't deny it. Calories in minus calories out. That's what it goes. But it seems to be in the back of your mind. Yeah, but it isn't just while you're pumping iron. It's also, what about the rest of your day? What about when your heart is beating a little bit faster because you've got more mitochondria? What about when your heart is beating a little bit stronger? What about when your liver is metabolizing things in a more effective way? And those are things that are not part of the Kentucky Derby. They're not part of your pumping iron or you're eating the meal, but it is part of what comes from doing yoga. So that's I mean, in a way, it's the sleeper argument. Though there's even a third thing to say, which I think is worth saying, although it's incomplete at this point, and that has to do with research that's going on in Sweden. And here's what it is. It's, to me, it's fascinating and mysterious. I'll tell you the basic experiment. Okay, they take two groups of mice and rats, because they want to prove this is true for all mammals, all species that have bones anyway, all chordata, I guess. So they do operations on all of them. Half of them get a 20 milligram pellet that they sew into their abdomen. The other half get an empty pellet that doesn't weigh very much of anything, and they sew that into their abdomen. And of course, then they measure their weight. So immediately after the surgery, of course, they lose weight after surgery, and then they gradually gain weight. And if you wait about 3 weeks, you see this beautiful graph. And the ones that they put the 20-gram pellets in, it's going to knock you off your chair. The ones they put the 20-gram pellets in put on 20 grams less weight.
That's fascinating. And we are going to take a little break for comments from our sponsors. So just hang in there with us and we'll be right back.
Okay.
So Dr. Loren Fishman, author of Yoga for Weight Loss, you were saying that there's research about surgery where experimenters put pellets with weights and pellets without weight into rats. And share with us what this means for us about weight loss.
Well, what's so interesting is that 3 weeks later, the rats that they put the pellets into weigh exactly the same as the rats that they put weightless pellets into, so that the weight of the pellets somehow has been calculated into the ideal total weight of the rat. The rats eat a little less so that 3 weeks later, their actual body mass is exactly 20 grams less than the rats that have the hollow pellets that don't weigh anything. So they wanted to figure out, well, what is causing this 20, what is the way that these rats are calculating? Mice, same thing with the mice. How are these rats and mice calculating? Oh, actually, we eat a little bit less, so I equal the total weight that I had before, even with the 20 grams. So I myself, without the pellet, will weigh 20 grams less. And so they thought, it's leptin. It's one of those hormones the fat molecules give off, the fat cells give off. And they said, but so they, with modern genetic wizardry, they created rats and mice that didn't have leptin. And they tried it again. And it turned out the same thing happened. There was that 20-gram discrepancy, just the amount of the pellet. And they did other things too. And so what they've concluded is that it's actually the osteocytes. It's the bone cells in the legs of the mice and rats that are calculating how much pressure is on them. And that 20 grams adds, of course, directly to the pressure on the osteocytes in the legs of the rat and mice. So there is a third mechanism by which yoga may reduce weight by putting additional strain on those osteocytes. For example, when you lift your leg and you put it way up over your head, well, aren't you doing something to stretch? Aren't you putting an awful lot of pressure on the femur there, the thigh bone? Yes. And is that bone having osteocytes that might inform the brain about whether it should have an appetite or not? Apparently, yes. So those are the three mechanisms, the three standard mechanisms by which yoga reduces weight. By the way, I've never read anybody else who sums them up and puts them together like that. Yeah, so I just thought I'd tell you.
Pretty fascinating. Okay. Now, Dr. Loren Fishman, let's take this in practical terms. Somebody's listening, they're like, okay, I'm sold. I'm tired of starving. I'm tired of over-exercising. I'm ready to do something that feels good and that I can do the rest of my life.
Now, what do I do?
now what do I do? So if you were going to recommend for someone how they could use yoga to lose weight, first of all, how often do they need to practice yoga? How long do their practices need to be? And what yoga poses work the best?
What do that? I mean, the key is which are the poses that work. So let's start right there. If you're a normal, healthy person, extension, the ones I've just been talking about, I'll give you some names. I think the best one is probably the bridge, which is called Setu Bandhasana in Sanskrit. Another one that's very good is the locust, which is called Shalabhasana in Sanskrit. Another one is Dhanurasana. Urdhva Dhanurasana, or any of the Dhanurasana. The Dhanur is the bow where you're arching your back, you're stretching the stomach. Those are the best ones, and you do them 20 minutes before you eat, and you do them, I would say holding them for 20 to 30 seconds is going to be enough. And that will reduce you may find you have to hold them a little longer, and then it will definitely suppress your appetite, and that's what you want to do. And you do it with every meal, before breakfast, before lunch, and before dinner. But if you're going to start out gradually, do it with the meal that you usually eat the most, which is probably either lunch or dinner. Do it with that meal so that you can start and have some effect. Weigh yourself day 1, weigh yourself on day 7 or 8. Give it a week and see how it's doing, because nothing succeeds like success. When you see you've lost a pound in a week and it hasn't really been very hard, that might stimulate you to do it after lunch as well as after dinner. Before lunch or before dinner. So that's what I recommend. Now, let me say a little more, okay? Because some people have spinal stenosis, and they're not supposed to arch their backs like that. Other people have facet syndrome or hernia, and they arching like that isn't so good. Then twists are also very good. One of them is called Marishasana, which is also known as Marishi's pose. It was a great woman yogi many, many years ago. Another one is Matsyendrasana, the half fish pose. That's another twist that's good. Another one is Parivrita Trikonasana, which is the twisted triangle or the reverse triangle. Excellent for this. Any of the twists. The twisting poses are good. Bharadvajasana, which I don't think has a good English translation. It's another twist. Parsvakona, here's a tough one. Parivrita Trikonasana, the twisted side ankle pose. Almost any of the twists will do this. Now, when do you do the twists? Well, if you have osteoporosis, you can do the twist. It's very good for them. If you have spinal stenosis, the twists are okay. If you have a hernia, maybe not. So then, I mean, also maybe you're in a place where you can't sit down, you have a stand-up job. Then you can do the standing poses. And there are some standing poses that are very good, like the twisted triangle, that's very good. The twisted side angle pose, so Parivrita Trikonasana and Parivrita Parsvakonasana, those are very good poses for this. Another one, but see another one that's good for standing. Another one that's pretty good is called Parsvottanasana, where it's a bit of a twist. It's enough of a twist to be successful. Doesn't have a good English name either.
And Dr.
And there are times sitting and you can't stand up. Maybe you're in an airplane. Maybe you're driving in a car, in a cubicle. To unmute yourself.
So Dr. Loren Fishman, we are going to take another commercial break to hear from one of our very special sponsors. So Dr. Loren Fishman, so in your view, the poses that we need to really focus on the most, that you find the most effective for weight loss, are number one, back bends, number two, twists, and number three, standing poses. If you were going to recommend, if you were going to give a prescription as a medical doctor for someone who wanted to achieve their ideal size, how often would you recommend they practice yoga and for how long?
Well, as I say, what they really have to do are poses before they eat 3 times a day. So that's how often. How long? 20 to 30 seconds of these poses. It's not a great big yoga regimen. It's not like running 6 miles. It's much easier than that. But I think there are certain special circumstances. You might add some poses also, like there are other arching the back poses, like the camel, which is also very good. The Sphinx, the upward facing dog, which are also good and which adapt to different circumstances. I was saying before we took the commercial break that you may be in a place where you're constrained to sit. And if you're constrained to sit, then you could do, put your knees up on the chair, probably you could do the camel. Or Ustrasana, you can do that pose. You can do the twists, Marishasana, Matsyendrasana. There are poses you could do that way. Also, some forward bends where you put enough pressure on your abdomen that probably will work too, though it hasn't been tested. Like half lotus forward bend. It's got a terrible Sanskrit, long Sanskrit, not terrible, long Sanskrit name, Ardha Padma Janu Shirshasana. What a name. And that one, your heel goes up into your abdomen a bit, and it does make it likely that you will be pressing against your stomach and stretching it a bit. So the answer is you don't have to do much yoga. Suppose you did 4 poses for 30 seconds each. It's only 2 minutes. 2 minutes, 3 times a day. So that adds up all the way to 6 minutes. This is not big time hunk of your day. So that's how often you have to do it. That's how long you have to do it. And that's what you need to do. See, what I've tried to do is not just say in general, in some wholesale way, do yoga, lose weight. I'm telling you exactly the poses that are likely to affect that change.
So that's fascinating. So what's interesting about your approach to yoga is, although it's great to go to classes and to have a regular yoga practice, you're talking about really integrating yoga into your everyday life?
I think that's what yoga's always been all about. It's what weight loss has also been all about. You don't want to just have 20 minutes of the day where you do yoga the way you might have 20 minutes in the day where you walk the dog or something. It's not like that. You want to sort of, say it this way, you want to embed your life in yoga. If you want to, achieve, there are other reasons to do yoga too, and they play into weight loss. And one of them is the spiritual impulse. Because, people like money, people like pleasure, people like to wear fancy clothes, people like baseball. I mean, there are all kinds of things people like, but they won't die for them. The only things people are really willing to put up their lives for are either patriotism or religion. Things that have a certain deep spiritual connection. You would die for democracy, as I believe no, it was actually a woman who said this, it's often quoted as being Voltaire, but it's a woman. She said, I may not agree with what you say, but I will give my life for your right to say it. 19th century woman said that. And people feel that way about democracy. They're willing to lay down I feel that way. I would lay down my life for democracy. I really would. I think it's that good a thing that the governing earn the right to govern because of the selection of the people. It's the people who give the people who govern the right to govern them. I like that. I like it a lot. And yoga has a spiritual element. No one could deny it. There are people who go on and say yoga is not a religion, and it isn't a religion. It's monotheistic. There's one great Ishvara, one great big God up there, but you don't have to believe in that great big God up there. It's non-sectarian. It doesn't prefer Hinduism to Buddhism or Christianity or Islam. Not at all. Let me just say, some will go this far as to say yoga is not a religion. It is what is common to all religions, and that may be a little bit of an extreme claim, but there are elements in yoga that make you feel that way. Mr. Iyengar would say, yoga, what he would say, my body is my temple, and the asana are my prayer. And that fits in with what we're talking about. And if you have a spiritual strength belief in yoga, you ain't going to quit in 2 years. You're not going to say, okay, I lost the weight. Well, I did enough yoga. It's time for miniature golf. You're going to go on and do yoga and meditate and get more in touch with yourself. So I just wanted to say that. Forgive me.
So Dr. Loren Fishman, you bring up some really interesting points, and you have practiced yoga at your 81, you've practiced yoga about 45 years. I'm 62. I think this is my 27th year now teaching yoga. And so let's talk about the psychological aspects, because it's my observation as a long-term teacher of yoga that yoga helps you be more at peace with your body.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the reason that people want to lose weight in the first place is because they're unhappy with some aspect of who they are. So how, in your years, decades of experience teaching yoga, writing about yoga from this deep perspective, how do you think that yoga helps us be more at peace with our bodies and who we are, and how that translates in a very practical sense into weight loss?
Okay, 2 aspects. One, yoga reduces your anxiety. It just makes you calmer, makes you more able to accept who you are and what the world is, and what your husband or your wife or your friends or your children or your parents are. It makes you calmer so that you don't reach a psychotic level of anxiety by confronting reality, which sometimes is quite a threat, given the nature of our friends and our children and parents and so on. They can raise it pretty high. And just being calm gives you the wherewithal to countenance it, to accept it, to see it anyway. So that's one big way yoga works. You look in the mirror and you say, I'm not gorgeous, I'm fat, and then you can sort of take it in and evaluate what that means. which is important because, you know, billions of dollars have been spent in medical education. You know, you get high blood pressure, you get diabetes, you get arthritis, you know, there are all kinds of things. You get, cancer treatments are less effective for many things because you're fat, because you weigh more than you should. So there are many medical reasons. It hasn't made a dent in the incidence of obesity in the United States. Nothing. So it's because, as you're, I think, alluding to, that it doesn't get into them. They don't realize, hey, that's me. The second way that yoga helps you, and it was just a Harvard newsletter about it last week. Yoga actually raises your memory, your reasoning capacities, your problem solving capacities, your emotional IQ, and you're more intelligent. And you say, oh, you know, being a little more intelligent, you're able to recognize things and note them and entertain the ambiguity. Well, on the one hand, I really want to eat this chocolate cake. And on the other hand, I don't want to get any more weight than I have right now. I don't want any more, you know, and to titrate those two and come to a rational resolution. So those are the two ways I think yoga helps you lose weight in a psychological sense. You also, I mean, I could go on and say, you know, yoga also has a way of getting you to appreciate the power of your own will. You know, some people have very little will. You say to them, let's go to the movies. They say, yeah, let's go to the movies. If you say to them, no, let's stay home tonight. And they say, yeah, let's stay home tonight. But with yoga, you begin to feel that you can actually do something. You feel your own potency, your own power in a way that you don't otherwise. And that impresses you and gives you a sense that you can do things that you didn't really know you could do before, that you sort of doubted and almost were afraid to try. So that's, I mean, yoga really does improve your self-esteem in a logical, sensible way. Well, I did this. I can, you know, I can stand on my head, things I never thought about, for example. So, and I have a request for you, Catherine.
Yes.
Call me Loren.
Loren, absolutely. Of course. My pleasure, my honor. And, you know, I just have a personal testimonial about it because I'm 62. I still teach yoga 8 times a week. And I'm the same size that I was. I have dresses in my closet that I bought when I was 28. They're beautiful dresses, so I keep them. But I don't diet. I eat pretty much whatever I like, mostly healthy, but you know, a few gummy bears, some wine, and it's not a struggle. So I think that yoga really does help you to be more at peace. So final question, Dr. Loren Fishman, my understanding, as it is, the two main factors that affect our metabolism are your insulin handling and your adrenal health. So let's just summarize for our audience. Metabolism is the sum total of the building up and breaking down processes in your body. So you're always breaking down because you're aging. You're older, a day older than you were yesterday. But is your body healing? So Dr. Loren Fishman, Loren, how does yoga improve our ability to handle stress and therefore reduce the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline? And how does yoga improve our insulin handling?
Yeah, well, the cortisone itself is very anti-insulinemic. It makes the insulin less effective than it was before. It's very straightforward, and the cortisone levels rise when you're stressed, and yoga lowers your stress, therefore lowers your adrenal levels, the corticosteroids, and therefore allows the insulin to do what it has to do. And when it does what it has to do, you don't need as much of it, and you're not as likely to get what they call insulin resistance, which is the main cause of diabetes type 2, which is the one that's associated so strongly with how much you weigh. So it's just a straight line, you know, nothing very sophisticated and recherche. If you lower your anxiety in a systematic way, not just right now by having a glass of wine, which will do it, but yoga will do it in a much broader and deeper sense. Then you will lower the amount of corticosteroids you're injecting into your system, let the insulin do what it's supposed to do in the first place, and your metabolism will carry on in the way it's also supposed to do. Now, suppose you really do eat less, then this other hormone-like substance called leptin. Leptin is the Greek word for slim. Leptin comes in, secreted by the fat cells. That's where it comes from. So there's a natural feedback loop. We're getting a little more complex here. So the feedback loop is if you've got a lot of fat cells, you're going to make a lot of leptin, and you're going to reduce your appetite and have less fat in your fat cells. So the way this new medicine works, this semaglutide, is it fools your body into thinking that you have more insulin. So you secrete less insulin and you get more of this leptin coming out, and certainly less calories are brought into your cells, which is what the insulin does. It lets the sugars get out of your bloodstream and into your cells. It's got the key.
So Dr. Loren Fishman, author of Yoga for Weight Loss and director of the Manhattan Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation Center. Any final thoughts for our audience? Any words of encouragement for people who are wanting to achieve their ideal size and are tired of starving and over-exercising?
Oh, yeah, I think, the last time I saw Mr. Iyengar, I was giving a talk in Haridwar, in this little town in the north of India, sacred city, so medieval that the streets are too narrow for a car, sometimes too narrow for a rickshaw. And some ambitious guru in India has built a huge center there. And I was invited to give a talk there, so I went and I gave a talk. And after my talk, this yawning auditorium, it must have held 2,500 people, honestly. And satellite dishes sending it out in English and in Hindi to India and Canada and so on. And as I was walking down from the stage, who was walking up onto the stage but my beloved teacher, Mr. Iyengar? I felt like a cat. I brought my wife to India, and she's not a yogi, so I didn't want to go visit my guru. And there he was coming up, and I'm going down. I said, he saw me, he said, fish. I said, no, Fishman. He said, oh, Fishman, yes. And I said, Mr. Iyengar, we're passing. He's coming up, I'm going down. If this were the last time you said you spoke to me, and it was, what would you say to me? And to his great credit and to the integrity of his character, he thought about it for a minute. And he said, you only rent your body. Which means don't feel you can abuse it. It's not yours. You're just renting it. Treat it like a good citizen, like a good tenant. Treat it well. And we're only visiting in this body. It's part of the universe. Don't think you own it. And that applies to people who abuse their bodies in all kinds of ways. Could be cutting, could be drugs, and could be putting on too many calories, putting on too much weight.
You've been listening to
the divine respect.
Yes, and unfortunately we have to end our interview. So
I'm so hot.
I know it's just been wonderful. So you've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. Dr. Loren Fishman, you can find out more about his wonderful work at sciatica.org. And remember, if you've been struggling to lose weight, try yoga. There's so many reasons why yoga works to heal your body and help you achieve your ideal size naturally. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.